Normally, the last person that we're putting our energy into is our spouse or our partner, but no, you need to make them the priority. Ultimately, we all want to feel wanted. And how do you make someone feel wanted? Early in my relationship, I was keeping score and we were both losing. It's a bad habit. If you don't stop it, it can get out of control.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Dr. Rewire Show. I'm Dr. Rewire, aka Dr. Alok Trivedi. Thanks for being here today. And I really want to impress upon you the power of living a life of inspiration, because inspiration is the key that opens the door to live the life that you want to. And today we have someone that's actually been able to live a life of inspiration and been able to help so many people through her work. She's not only a real estate investor, a mother, a businesswoman, a movie producer, a best-selling author, but she's just a straight up amazing human being. And I've had the chance to get to know her briefly, but truly in my time with her, I've been blessed to be able to understand her and get to know her essence and who she is. Please help me welcome the one, the only Kathryn Gordon. Please, Kathryn, thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. It's so good to see you.
It's so great to see you again as well. Let's dive into this. Let's go right into this. Relationship grit. Let's talk about it, because relationships are tough.
Yeah.
They're hard for people.
Yeah.
And you've gone through your journey and learning about relationships. Where did this all start for you? Why did this whole journey begin?
Yeah. Well, we wrote the book Relationship Grit, and I'm sure people think, oh, a relationship book telling me how great the relationship is and how we can have it too. Well, that's not the book. I mean, the whole reason we wrote this book is because we went through hell. I mean, there were so many ups and downs and things that happened throughout our marriage. But on the flip side of that, now 26 years later, at the time we wrote the book, 24, we were able to look back and see, wow, look at all the things that we went through, and we were able to get to the other side. And so what started happening is I would meet people or run into people at the grocery store and they'd pour their heart out. It was the craziest thing. Or I'd be standing in the line at the airport. I'm not kidding. And all of a sudden people are confessing, we're splitting up or we're getting divorced. And I started to hear a lot of what sounded like the same issues presented differently.
Yeah.
And so I would, share a little bit about my story or whatever. And so I finally got home one day and I'm like, John, I really think we need to write a book. We need to write a book and we need to tell our story and then talk about how we overcame all those obstacles and give people a guideline or some tips and bumpers and things that they can do to get through issues and hard times, because it's not that you're going to avoid them. You're not going to avoid them. Life happens, but it's about how are you handling them? And in John's case, he didn't handle them well. He did not handle stress well. He was very much really needed to be alone and introverted. And here we had these two small children and we were trying to run a business. So it was a recipe for disaster. So that's how the book came about, was really just, me sharing tips and, trying to help people with their relationships. And so we decided to write Relationship Grit.
I love it. And now grit for you is an acronym. And I know, but I'd love for you to share kind of the acronym and let's work through each one of these steps in detail so that we can actually use it to help people and understand these different levels, and then they can get more information, because the relationship grit is not about just, you just got to bear it out, but this is about a process. Which is what I love about this book.
Yeah. And that's what I say too. When I say grit, I'm not talking about like clenching your, fist or gritting your teeth. I mean, using these action steps to give you the relationship you always wanted. And so the G stands for God. And I know this is a loaded topic for a lot of people. So I want you to think about it like this. I mean, even 12-step programs, right? They call on a higher power. So it's about calling on something or believing in something bigger than yourself. And so bringing God into your relationship, or a higher power, I'll say that.
See, I love the way you're
And
saying that, because it's not just about a God. It's not just about your deity or your form of a deity or your relationship. It's more about something that unifies you, that's outside of yourself. And from a scientific standpoint, just coming at it from a different side, right? We all need something outside of us to create unity, right? Even Ronald Reagan said many years ago, he said, the world will never have world peace unless we have an attack from the aliens. And I'm paraphrasing it a bit, but that's true. You need war, something from the outside to unify us on the inside. So whether you want to call it God, universal intelligence, Krishna, Allah, makes no difference. At some point, have something outside of you that unifies you. I think that's kind of what you're trying to say. Am I correct?
you absolutely, you got it. That's exactly it. That's exactly it. And, for us, it's been quite a journey. John was Jewish, and then I was raised Catholic, but never really went to church. And then as young adults, we were both New Age. I didn't know John at the time. I got really, really into energy work. I'm actually a certified Reiki master, level 1. But so did a lot of that. And then, funny enough, even though I would say I was Christian, for me, I did say I didn't practice. John, we had an energy healer, a Buddhist energy healer that we used to go to get body work done on us. And it was that energy healer that ended up having a conversation with John about Jesus, where John was like, I got to look into this guy. And so that kind of, it's funny, started him on really just learning, like wanting to know. It wasn't even really from a religious standpoint, but he ended up reading enough and talking to enough people and experiencing things that he became a Christian. And so in that, a follower of Jesus, I like to say, you have to be careful, because like church, a lot of church people, they're not really followers of Jesus. That's a whole other story. So, but anyway,
how does God come into the relationship side? That's what I'm getting ready
to tell you. So, well, what ended up happening in our relationship, I need to share this before I tell you about the G, is we had started kind of, unifying on our beliefs. About 14 years into our marriage, John and I were walking on the beach one day, and I wasn't feeling really connected to him. And I said, I was telling him about how I wasn't feeling connected and how one of our friends was getting divorced and another one was cheating on her husband. And he literally stops dead in the sand, turns and looks at me and says, I have something to tell you. Mm-hmm. And he proceeds to tell me that he had cheated on me at the beginning of our marriage, which was 14 years earlier. So needless to say, I was going to divorce him, right? So the very thing that I was worried about and having anxiety and not feeling good about in our relationship had now brought me to a place where I was going to divorce him. And so in the process of that, he started to do everything he could to get the relationship back. He was on a plane, talked to this guy, poured his heart out, and he said, you need to come up with a prayer for your family and for your relationship. So the God part came in because John came up with a prayer. And he said this prayer every single night. He would just not stop saying it. And I would never say it with him. But do you want to hear what it is?
Sure.
Okay. God, we invite you into our marriage and family to love us, to heal us, to unite us, to strengthen us, so we can grow strong together and serve you together and raise children that glorify and honor you. And he would say this. I would not say it. I tried to cheat on him. That's a whole other story. I mean, literally, it wouldn't happen. Like physically, it was the craziest thing. So that didn't work. So finally, one night I'm laying in bed and he was saying the prayer, and I had started to memorize the prayer just because I would hear him say it, obviously, but I would never say it out loud. And finally, one night I did say it out loud with him. I grabbed his hand and we said it together. And that was the night that I resolved to stay in the marriage. And so the next letter in GRIT is R for resolve. You know, you have to resolve to stay in your relationship and work things out.
What do you mean by that? What do you mean by resolve? Because I think that's such a general, It's a general word, but what do you mean specifically when you say
I
this?
mean, you need to make the decision to stay where you are. You need to decide. I think resolve, if I remember the definition, is deciding on a strong course of action.
Got it.
And so it is about deciding that the grass isn't greener on the other side, right? The grass is greener where you water it. I mean,
I know it's so true.
It's an old saying, and so really staying in your relationship and working on things. And so he had resolved to fight for me and fight to keep us in the relationship. He resolved. Yeah. And then I, in turn, when he was doing all those things, resolved to stay in it. And that's when the real work with us began. And
you're telling me that the real relationship, the real work of the relationship began 15 years, for lack of better words, or lack of better timing, 15 years into the relationship. The first 14 years were kind of this, foundational standpoint.
Listen, I say this to young couples. I mean, it's the hardest time. I mean, I'm sure there are couples out there that were way further along than us, in terms of like not waiting 14 years. But in our case, I mean, we were on, stress autopilot. We were young entrepreneurs. I literally got pregnant 3 months after we got married. I mean, everything was like boom, 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 boom. So we really we weren't focused on each other. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Completely.
Yeah. And so really it wasn't until this happened in what he shared happened in our life that we were able to stop and think, okay, wow, we need to make our relationship number one. And that's where the I comes in for grit, which is invest. And I know that sounds so simple, like, well, yeah, but think about it. So many times we invest in our work relationships. We invest in our children, rightly so. We need to do that. We invest in our friendships. Normally the last person that we're putting our energy into is our spouse or our partner, because you kind of think, well, of course they're going to be there. They're my partner, right? But no, it's like you need to make them the priority. And it can be small investments. John Gottman did a study, and couples who invest small amounts of time are 85% more likely to stay together.
Interesting.
Yeah. And so for us, it was about the little things. And there were some big things that had to happen. For sure. But, John, up to that
let me ask you this. Allow me to interrupt just for a second. When you say invest, what do you mean? Like date nights? Do you mean vacations? Do you mean like write each other notes? Like what, maybe some examples of investments would give kind of listeners a better feel for it.
Okay. So my husband is an author and speaker like you. And so he travels around a lot, and he's always packing his suitcase and unpacking. And I will be on the other side of the house, like washing the dog or something. I mean, I'm always doing like something where honey, he gives me a call, and I know he wants me to go into the closet and help him pick out an outfit. And honestly, he has 5 suit jackets, and like 7 shirts. I have told him over and over what matches what. But every single time I walk in there and I'm like, oh yeah, that'll look good with those shoes. I can see the look on his face. Like he just loves that. Like it's a small investment that I do for him that goes a long way. And so it's not always about doing things we really want to do, so it might be a little inconvenient, but it's little things. John, I will call John. I know he's driving home from the airport. The last thing he wants to do is stop at the store and pick up, an item from, like an onion that I'm cooking dinner with. But he'll do it for me. Right. And so it's it's investments in small sacrifices. I should add that in there. Sometimes it is a sacrifice, and sometimes it is an investment, like something really great, like we're going to take a trip to Hawaii, or we're going to walk on the beach after work. A lot of times we'll do that. We just take a walk. So it's just little amounts of time. It could be quality time. It doesn't necessarily, it's not about quantity, but it's about quality time. So I got to tell you something, and I'm writing a book right now on sex and intimacy. And as I'm talking to a lot of people, and not just couples, just people I'm interacting with, and they start talking about their boyfriend, their girlfriend, their spouse, whatever, somebody they want to be in relationship. There's one common theme that I'm starting to find, and it boils down. It might exhibit differently with different people in the way they say it, but ultimately, we all want to feel wanted.
Yeah,
we all want to feel wanted. And how do you make someone feel wanted? You invest in them, give them your energy, acknowledge them, right? So that's the I.
Yeah, I think maybe a way that I can help paraphrase it for everyone here as well is that care enough about other people to know what's important in their values and serve their values rather than just your own values, right? Care enough about what they want so that it's not all about you. I think a lot of times in relationships, and I know I've been guilty of this over my years and being married and divorced and the whole 9 yards, I've gone through the whole spectrum of it, where you think it's all about you, but the relationship is really about a unison. It's really interesting. And if I can just kind of maybe take a side tangent, really, like in the Western world, the idea of relationships is very different than it was in the Eastern world, right? Coming from, my parents grew up in India. I grew up in Toronto, but the idea of relationships was very different, right? Here in the Western world, relationships are about happiness and connection, and we're in the Eastern world, it's about becoming whole and balancing masculine and feminine energies and learning to love the person that you become as you learn to balance with this person. It's a game of balance rather than a game of dopamine. I think a lot of times, and we've all been guilty of this, I think, is that we search for dopamine in relationships, and sex, intimacy, all these factors are all dopamine factors of relationships, right? We get sexually turned on to somebody because of dopamine. We get intimate with someone because we think that they'll provide us a greater sexual experience. That's how all human beings look at relationships first, right? Men look at it visually. Women look at it, will they be a provider inside that? We all have these programs that were evolutionary based on our DNA. But if we can put aside my thought, and I think this is kind of what you're saying as well, and kind of tagging on your conversation here, but I think if we can learn to govern that and care about the person as a human being, we don't end up getting caught up in our own ego, preventing us from actually learning to love the person and their needs. Would you agree with that?
I would agree 100%. John has a saying, and I want to make sure I say it right. The more I love my wife, the more I love my wife. But the more I love my wife, the more I love my life. And it's not what you think. It's not. In other words, he's saying the more that I give and the more that I invest in my relationship, the more I love my life. Not happy wife, happy life, right?
No, I get it.
But being selfless and loving someone else. And so, and I can say, I don't have that saying. I don't say it. I could, but I'll let him say that one. But it's the truth. I mean, how rewarding, I don't even want to say, I don't think the word is rewarding, but like to love someone else and share that. It's like a soul connection.
I like to say it this way. I like to sit and say, the more you actually love someone, the more they actually turn into the person you love.
Ooh, I love that.
Because it's true. The more you actually love them without judgment, the more they actually will become the person you want to love.
That is so true.
And it's hard sometimes. I'm not saying it's easy, right? We can sit here and talk about this all day. It's great to have conversation, but to live it is a different experience.
It's completely the hardest thing. And I got to tell you, I mean, It takes a lot of emotional maturity.
Well, I think that's, I don't know if you know this about my work, Kathryn, but I've worked with a lot of relationships and couples and, I kind of like a lot of people when they come work with me on a one-on-one basis, they'll bring relationships and I'll look at their blood work, their lab work, and then I'll rewire their bodies and brains so that whatever resentments, guilt, and shames that they're holding on to, like within a matter of a day, I pretty much have it all resolved and they can get back to reconnecting and living their life.
That's awesome. I love that. I worked with someone like that before. We'll talk about that off camera.
Yeah.
But that's great that you do that.
Yeah, and it's not
like
not
what?
often,
So
but
it's
yeah.
like somatic work. I mean, you're clearing it out.
Yeah, and it's important inside that because in a relationship, we all we harbor resentments and guilts and shame, and they become factors in our physiology.
Yep.
And those then become the illnesses and conditions that we actually become components of. And I'll say this since it's more of a Dr. Rewire show than rather than another show. And I've said this many times over in my events and programs. The number one cause of illness is actually emotionally your spouse. The number one cause of illness is actually your spouse.
Wow.
I know people don't want to hear it because it's all the judgments, the person you live with.
But it makes sense.
Correct. The more you harbor and resent and hold all of that stuff.
It's the most intimate person in your life, the one that has the most access to you. Yeah.
So it's really interesting. T, what does T stand for?
T. And it kind of goes along with what we've been talking about, but it's together. Yeah. And it sounds kind of like, well, yeah, but meaning like you both have to want it, but it doesn't mean you both have to want it the same amount at the same time. I mean, there's always going to be an ebb and flow of one of you putting in more effort than the other. That's life. But both of you really wanting to work on the relationship, have a great relationship, and invest the time and energy into each other. I liken it to this. I say T could also stand for team. Remember, you're on the same team, right? And I'm guilty of this. I'm telling you, early in my relationship with John, I mean, I was keeping score. Like I was keeping score and we were both losing because, I
think that's so important. I think it's so true. And the younger you are, the more score you keep.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
That's so true. It's true. Like I'm just thinking about relationships I've seen people I've had. The more I did this for you, you did this for me. It's like a tit for tat type thing.
Yeah. And don't you think that's a bad, it's almost like, it's a bad habit. Whereas I think if you don't stop it, it can get out of control. Like that can be, and it really kind of shocks me too. Like, I'm at the place, like I said, 26 years married, 28 years together. And so, a lot of the couples that we're with have been married around the same amounts of time. It is shocking sometimes, though, just to hear some of that or some of it scorekeeping. And I'm like, oh, this could be so much better if they weren't doing it. So it doesn't mean it's the demise of the relationship, but it could be so much richer if you weren't there keeping score.
I would actually challenge that. And I'd say it is the demise of the relationship. Because
ultimately,
it is because you're in that relationship because of your ego and your pride rather than the connection of the person, right? It's like so often, if you've been married 28, 30 years, I mean, you're in the 50s for the most part, at least, right? Late 40s, 50s, if you started early. And a lot of times, relationship, let's just have a real chat about this. People get into relationships, realize 8, 10, 20 years later that they don't want to be in it, but they're comfortable in it. And so what they do is that they'll start keeping score in that relationship, but really keeping score in my work and everything I've studied and watching people and human behavior, keeping score is nothing more than just saying, this is what I did for you, which is your pride.
Right.
And continuing to put yourself above them. Okay. I had a person once tell me this, is that if you think you're above someone or below someone, you're off balance. If you can be in fair exchange with someone, you'll open your heart and allow them to live there.
So you're exactly right. And I agree with you 100%. So I guess what I'm saying when I say it's not necessarily the demise of the relationship is When I'm saying that, I'm not saying it's a good thing, but
Yeah.
I do have to say, I know couples that probably will stay together forever, but they have horrible relationships. So
I know
it
many.
may,
I know
yeah,
many.
yeah. So my point is, when I say not the demise, meaning that may not set them off for divorce, is what I'm trying to say. But it's certainly not the way to have a deep, loving, respectful, fulfilling relationship. Yeah.
When I was going through my divorce process and going through that whole journey, and I'm not saying marriage is right for people. I'm not saying divorce is right for people. I'm just saying you've got to make your decisions what's right for you inside of it. Divorce for me can be a completely sacred, blessed experience. And it was for me. It absolutely was for me. And marriage can be a sacred, blessed, loved experience. But marriage could also be the hellacious hell that you live in as well if you can't govern yourself and the other person doesn't govern themselves. So every journey has their own journey inside of it. But what I have realized in my experience, and you're the expert by any means, but what I've realized is this, is that if you learn to love yourself, then that's the first place you start. That's where it begins. That's where you get grit, is learn to love you for who you are. And instead of judging them, look at who you are and what you're doing first. And let the mirror and the mirror neurons come back and let it reflect back to you. And then once you own that, then it may be an opportunity to have a discussion with others. And I think that that's ultimately what grit stands for, if I'm not mistaken.
I love it. And I actually have a story about that. And yes, it does. And I have a story about that. So when we were in the throes of, I was raising the kids, I say I, because my husband was traveling all the time. This is before he dropped the bomb, by the way, but it was, around that time. He came flying into the kitchen. I'm in my nightgown. My hair's all like a rat's nest. The kids are running late for school. I'm trying to race to make lunches. And he comes in, and I'm telling you, he looked so handsome. I mean, I was like, and I had this pang of jealousy.
Mhm.
And all I wanted to do was cut him down. That was it. I just was,
Yeah.
it was on the tip of my tongue because I was going to make him feel like crap. And all of a sudden I just stopped and I'm like, oh my gosh, it's because of me. Like I was not feeling good about myself. I was feeling insecure about myself. I wasn't feeling like, I was as maybe fit as I wanted, I just was not in a good place.
Yeah.
And right then when I realized that, I said, you're not going to do it. And I turned around and I was like, John Gordon, you look so handsome in that suit. You better watch yourself. This lady is going to be checking you out. And he just got the biggest smile on his face, like a kid. And he was just like, I love you, and then off he went. And I noticed it actually made me feel better. Like instead of me, and I really started to check myself. And so when those feelings it became like a muscle, strengthening a muscle. When I get that feeling, really take a look at myself and then act differently if it was not going to be, kind. And so you're right. I mean, it is all about that. We got to look at ourselves. We got to work on ourselves. It starts with us and then it goes outward.
So true. It's so true. There's no question. If you can catch yourself in the middle of that and change that, that is an emotional awareness that most people need to aspire to. So congratulations for yourself and working on yourself through it as well. There you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Relationship grit. Let's summarize again. God, resolve,
invest,
and do together. I love that. 4 simple steps to live a life of mastery in relationships. Kathryn, where can people get more information? Where can they learn about you? Where can they get a copy of the book? How can they get more grit in their life?
Yeah. I actually go to my website, kathrynforreal.com. I've got some free downloadable PDFs. One of them is a gratitude journal, and it's really just 3 prompts that you can do at night with your partner. And it's just a way to kind of connect you two and start to get it on the same page. Yeah. I'm on Instagram at Kathryn Gordon, and you can get my book, Relationship Grit, on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and all booksellers.
All book places you can get them. There you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Look, if you want to live a life of inspiration, you've got to take charge of your life. You've got to look at yourself, look in the mirror, and say, what am I going to do differently? because the hardest work to do is to look at yourself and do something different. It's not easy. It's simple, but it's not easy. But if you're here watching this show and on this channel, that means you're one of the few that actually wants to make a change. You're one of the few that says, you know what? I want to upgrade my life and live a higher level of experience. And I commend you, respect you. And Kathryn is one of those people that I'm blessed to be able to bring to you, and grateful that she's been able to be a part of this journey for you. But realize we're just guides. We're just the ones allowing you to open the door for yourself to live the life that you want to. Go live inspired, and share the world your gifts. I will see you at the next perfect time. I'm Dr. Rewire, aka Dr. Alok Trivedi. Thanks a lot. Have a great day. Hey guys, if you like that video, click on the link over here and you're going to love the next video.